Am I audible to all of you now? Tina, am I audible?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, good evening, Dr. Mayaram, and thanks for joining us. It's really a privilege to host you today. Good evening, Professor Suresh Babu. Good evening, Professor Somen Chattopadhyay. Good evening, Dr. Kalyan Goswami. Good evening, Avni. Good evening, Ambika. We'll just start in another 1 or 2 minutes. Uh, so kindly bear with us for a minute or so. And thanks to all the participants for joining us today evening. It's really, we all are here to learn and understand things from the experts for that matter. So just few minutes more to go.
Thank you. I hope I am audible
You
to.
are, you are, sir. You are a little. Maybe it could be little louder.
Okay.
Yeah, it's better now.
Devdulal, I cannot see you. Is there any technical issues or
I can see you very.
you can, but I cannot see anyone. Let me call my technical people.
Yeah. Ambika, have you joined? So in the meantime, I'll request Tina to play the VSAP video so that we start it formally. And Dr. Goswami can fix his camera in the meantime. Thanks, Tina. Can you put forward the PPT to introduce the speakers? So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Vinaka Mission School of Economics and Public Policy. On behalf of the Board of Management, I welcome you all to this session, Response to Union Budget 2025-26. It is with great honor and immense gratitude that I welcome all the esteemed speakers to this special session. Today, we have the privilege of hosting some of the most distinguished minds in economics, public finance, policy research, and industry leadership. Their expertise, dedication, and contribution have shaped key sectors of our nation's economy, governance, and public service. As you can see, we have with us today none other than Dr. Arvind Mayaram. Dr. Mayaram is an eminent economist, and of course, he needs no introduction uh, in the sphere of public policy, but still, as a formality, let me have the honor to introduce Dr. Mayaram. He's an eminent economist and policymaker with an illustrious career in public administration, a retired Indian Administrative Service officer of the 1978 batch. He has played a crucial role in India's economic planning, infrastructure development, and financial governance. As former Finance Secretary of India, he has been instrumental in structuring public-private partnerships for national infrastructure projects. His leadership in establishing the National Skill Development Corporation and Trust has significantly strengthened India's workforce capabilities. Currently, Dr. Mayaram is the Vice Chairman of the Rajasthan Economic Transformation Advisory Council and Economic Advisor to the Chief Minister of Rajasthan.
I'm sorry, I think this has been taken from my earlier somewhere because this is not part of my bio note anymore. I'm no longer Vice Chairman of the Economic Transformation Council or Economic Advisor to the Chief Minister. I am presently Chairman of the Institute of Development Studies, Jaipur.
Thanks for the correction, sir, and our apologies for the inadvertent error. Thank you, sir. Thank you for being with us. And we're really honored to have you today and to deliver the inaugural address within a short while. We have with us today Professor Somen Chattopadhyay. Professor Chattopadhyay is a distinguished economist and academic specializing in the economics of education, public finance, and the black economy. With a PhD from the Jawaharlal Nehru University, his research has provided critical insights into macroeconomic imbalances and their implications for India's economic policies. As a professor at the Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies at JNU, he has shaped discourse on education funding, governance, and social equity. His extensive publications and research contributions have significantly influenced policy debates in India, making him a highly respected voice in academia and governance. We are fortunate to have Professor Chattopadhyay as an advisor to the Vinayaka Mission School of Economics and Public Policy as well. Thank you, Professor Chattopadhyay, for being with us today. We have with us Professor Suresh Babu. Professor Suresh Babu is a highly regarded development economist with expertise in applied macroeconomics, industrial economics, and trade policy. He is a PhD from JNU, and his research focuses on competition, market barriers, and productivity growth in the Indian manufacturing. He has held esteemed positions at the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, the Center for Development Studies, Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, Pune. With a tenure as an advisor to the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, he has actively contributed to national economic policies. Now, as director of the Madras Institute of Development Studies, he continues to advance economic research and policy making. I formally welcome Professor Suresh Babu to this session. Thank you, Professor Suresh Babu, for being with us. And just to mention that Professor Babu is also an advisor to this Vinayaka Mission School of Economics and Public Policy. We have today with us Ms. Avani Kapoor. Avani is a renowned expert in public finance and governance with nearly 2 decades of experience in strengthening accountability and policy implementation. She is the founder director of the Foundation for Responsive Governance, dedicated to making governance more transparent, responsive, and citizen-centric. Previously, she led the Accountability Initiative at the Center for Policy Research, driving research on public service delivery in education, health, sanitation, and nutrition. Her work has provided crucial data-driven insights to policymakers, helping bridge the governance gaps and improve government program efficiency, and making her a leading voice in public sector reform. I heartily welcome Avani to this session. Thanks, Avani, for being with us today. We have with us Mrs. Ambika Natarajan. Ambika is a senior technology leader and innovation strategist, currently serving as the senior vice president at HCL Tech. She specializes in digital workplaces, collaboration, content management, knowledge management, and workforce productivity. With a career dedicated to digital transformation, she has played a key role in enhancing enterprise efficiency, employee engagement, and business agility. Her leadership fosters a culture of continuous learning, innovation, and adaptability in the corporate sector. Ambika is an avid reader and music enthusiast. Ambika's holistic approach to leadership has positioned her as an influential figure in the digital and knowledge management space. Welcome, Ambika, to this session, Response to Union Budget 2025-26. Thank you for being with us. Last but not the least, let me introduce Dr. Kalyan Goswami. Dr. Kalyan Goswami would be moderating the session today. Dr. Goswami is a leading expert in agricultural policy and rural development. He is serving as the Director General of the Agrochem Federation of India. With over 32 years of experience in public affairs, governance, and industry advocacy, he has played a key role in shaping agricultural policy at both state and national levels. He began his career as a civil service officer in West Bengal before taking on leadership roles in various corporate organizations. Dr. Goswami is a prolific writer on agricultural economics. He advocates for digital technologies and precision agriculture to revolutionize farming and position India as a global agrochemical hub. Dr. Goswami also holds a PhD from the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade in related sector. Thank you, Dr. Goswami, for agreeing to be the moderator for this session. Thank you so much for being with us today. So we are truly privileged to have such an esteemed panel with us today. Their insights and expertise will provide valuable perspectives on crucial economic and policy challenges. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to all our speakers for joining us and look forward to an enriching and thought-provoking discussion. Thank you so much. Thanks all the participants for being with us. Without any further delay, I would hand over the charge of this session to Dr. Kalyan Goswami. Over to you, Dr. Goswami. You are mute. You are mute. You have to unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself, Dr. Goswami. Yeah.
Sure. Now you can hear me?
Yeah, please.
So good evening and many thanks to Devdulal for inviting me. It's really very difficult to moderate a session when my super boss is here. And I'm talking about Dr. Arvind Mayuram. We all know about him, but I had the opportunity to work with him when he was in Rajasthan. When he was in Delhi in rural development, I have worked with him. I am sure he will remember me.
Yes.
He's one of the most brilliant secretary I have seen in my life. I have worked with many secretary, joint secretary, additional secretaries. So, I'm feeling lucky. And at the same time, Professor Somen Chattopadhyay and Suresh Babu, both are eminent personalities in their own field. I also welcome Avani Kapoor and Ambika Natarajan. Let me start in a different way before I invite or request, Dr. Arvind Saab to give the inaugural address. Let me start in a different way. When the budget started in India, you all know that, post-independence, it was, delivered on 27th of November, 1947. I was just going through, the constitution in what is budget basically. See, budget is annual financial statement. If I look at Article 112 of the Constitution, it says that, the document to show brief receipt and disbursement along with broad details of tax revenues and other receipts, including breakup of expenditure plan and non-plan, allocation of plan outlays by sectors as well as by ministry, department, blah, blah. Last few years, I am seeing, I may be wrong, that budget is becoming more like a vision and mission document. It's no more a annual financial statement. Sir, Dr. Saab, like you remember that in our time, that there was, like flavor of the budget. Budget used to be a big, like festival. It was a festival. So now we all, the university student, used to, sit in front of Doordarshan and watch the budget and note down what the finance minister is saying. Nowadays, I'm seeing that flavor is gone. People are not that interested about budget. Somehow, that's the impression I'm getting. Even I saw in, like Rishi Bhavan, there are a number of televisions nowadays. In our time, there used to be 1 or 2 televisions only, black and white. Nowadays, there are a lot of, like LCD, LED. But I don't see anyone standing in front of that. Maybe they have mobile. That's a different thing. But watching budget together is a different, different thing, which is not happening. So we'd like to hear from you whether the budget is really losing its, charm, its interest, its objective. People say that, like in US, budget is placed in front of the Congress 1 month before, and the Congress takes decision which one to take, which one not to take. In UK, the budget is placed twice in a year. In Brazil, in France, in Germany, those countries, there is no annual budget. It happens, like whenever it is required. So now there's a big question in front of us whether should it remain as annual budget? That's number one question. Secondly, should it be only a mission and vision document, or like Article 112, it will be a real annual financial statement? Sir, you remained our finance secretary, and we'd like to hear from you in depth. Please enlighten us in which direction we are moving. Is it the right direction, or there need to be a change in the direction? It's my humble request to you. I know you are a very good speaker and you're an outspoken speaker. Sorry to use my word. We'd like to hear you. It should come from the depth of your heart. Sir.
Thank you very much. I'm overwhelmed by the perspective that you have presented. I think it'll take a while to be able to unravel exactly how the budget should be or how the budget is presented. But let me give it a try. And perhaps in what I say, you will see what my perspective is. What is not in the budget is more important than what is in the budget. And I would like to present that. We have a sterling panel today. Each one of them have great eminence, and I'm very sure that on each of these issues that I would like to raise now, we would have some discussion, and maybe we'll be able to get a little more understanding of these issues. The budget in India is not merely about government accounting, as you have mentioned. It's not just a financial statement or just getting parliamentary approval for spending in the coming year. It has always been, actually, in my opinion, it has always been a vision document. If you see right from the beginning, the government, because of our developmental needs, has always brought budget as a document of vision as to where the government should be going. And because earlier we used to have 5-year planning, the budget actually also reflected much of what had gone into the planning. Those 5-year plans. They used to be annual plans, and those annual plans used to be dovetailed into the budget which was presented. So this process always had been there. But today I would like to put before you that the budget should be assessed on how it impacts economic growth, because that has become one of the major points of discussion today in the country. And we have seen it has declined sharply recently. And on how it addresses the issue of equity, which again has been an issue with us for quite a long time, in terms of how welfare schemes should be. Nowadays, people call it reveries or freebies, or different names are also brought in. But how do we deal with equity, issue of equity? I think that's very important. And does the budget look at it comprehensively? Now, if you look at the economic growth in the last 3 quarters of the financial year 24-25, it became clear that the Indian economy was slowing down sharply and the recovery could take some time. UBS Group has observed that India's economy is entering a structural slowdown driven by weak credit growth, declining foreign direct investment, and a broader deceleration in the country's economic performance. With Trump taking the US presidency, there are fears of impending global trade war. The uncertainty it unleashes will adversely impact global growth prospects, and the Indian economy will have to depend much more on domestic drivers for growth. We must remember that India's GDP has grown at an average of less than 5% annually since 2019 and less than 6% since 2014. And therefore, the slowdown is not sudden or unexpected, something that we must keep in mind. And therefore, if we look at the 4 drivers of the Indian economy: private consumption, private investment, exports, and government expenditure, it would be interesting to see how the budget impacts these. Because without the budget addressing all these 4, it would be difficult for us to see how we will recover from the slowdown that we are seeing at the moment. So let's look at consumption, for instance. The demand has been sluggish, and despite an uptick in private consumption in the current financial year, there is some improvement. It has been uneven. Household consumption expenditure contributes the most to the GDP. It is also a strong indicator of how the people are faring. Do they have enough surplus in their hands to go out and buy vehicles, two-wheelers, FMCGs, clothes, etc.? Strong growth in consumption triggers production cycles, induces fresh investments or expansions, creates more jobs, and triggers demand for consumption items, creating a virtuous cycle. So demand and private consumption have been very much the bedrock of our growth story. Household consumption expenditure for India from 1960 to 23 has been 69.1%. The numbers from 20 to 24, which is third quarter, are 61.10, 60.95, 60.94, 60.34, and 61.97%. respectively, which is much below the average that we have seen in the last 50 years, 60, 70 years. What signal does the budget give to boost private consumption? This is one question that everybody has asked. Now, interestingly, government also has been sanguine about this. The grab line for this year's budget has been tax bonanza for middle class. According to the budget announcement, incomes of those earning up to rupees 12 lakhs have been made tax-free. Though tweaking, it is claimed that people earning at least rupees 25 lakh will save rupees 1.1 lakh yearly. There is also some marginal change in the top tax slab. However, this only applies to salary income and no other sources such as capital gains, etc., which will remain taxable. Because of this, the union government will forego rupees 1 lakh crore in revenue. So is this a game changer? This is a question, a lot has been spoken about this. Now let's first look at the myth of the Indian middle class. It is variously claimed that the Indian middle class is in the range of 350 million, 35 crores, or 450 million, which is 45 crore, making the Indian market larger than combined EU market. Everyone claims this, even the government claims this. Very recently, people research on India's consumer economy and India's citizen environment, a not-for-profit think tank released a report titled The Rise of India's Middle Class. According to their findings, the strength of the middle class is expected to rise from 432 million, which is 43 crore, in 2021 to 715 million, which is 71.50 crore, in 2030-31, and 1.2 billion, 1.02 billion, which is about 100 crores, of the India's projected population of 166 crores in 2047. This is their projection. Now, according to income tax return statistics for the assessment year 23-24, 7.54 crore salaried persons filed IT returns, out of which 5.89 crore had an income of less than 7 lakh per annum and were already exempt from paying any tax. If we take the 2023-24 figures with a tax exemption of income up to 12 lakh, the total number of tax exempted salaried persons will go up to 6.77 crore in 24-25. Therefore, the middle class bonanza will positively impact 90.84 lakh salaried persons. Now, this is the bonanza. This means that out of 43 crore middle class Indians, only 90.84 lakh would benefit from this bonanza. How much would this move the private consumption needle has yet to be seen. So this is one point that we need to keep in mind, that when we talk of middle class bonanza, etc., the numbers are misleading. Now, this consumption push can only come once the GST is drastically restructured and simplified, because GST is being paid by everyone, including the poor, and that is impacting the dampening, because it has become very complicated. These rates are so complicated, the classic example of which was explained in an equally classic manner by the finance minister by distinguishing between ordinary popcorn and caramelized popcorn. So, however, there's little indication that this is going to be addressed very soon. Now let's look at the private investment. The Make in India initiative was launched in September 2014 to push manufacturing and promote India as the most preferred global manufacturing destination. Now, there were several others, Make in India, Digital India, and so on. They all came. Government also gave attractive financial incentives through the Production-Linked Incentive Scheme. The stated objective of Make in India initiative are to increase manufacturing sector's growth rate to 12 to 14% per annum, to create 100 million additional manufacturing jobs in the economy by 2022, now it's gone to 2025, and to ensure that manufacturing sector's contribution to GDP is increased to 25% by 2025. Now, has the hope government pinned on this initiative fructified? Let's look at the numbers. Manufacturing value added as a percentage of GDP has been declining since 2014. From a level of 15% in 2014, it dropped to 13% in 2019. And after a marginal increase in 2020 and 21, it has remained stagnant at 13% till 23. While I do not have the figures for 2024, there's no indication of any improvement in these figures in the current year. Net foreign direct investment fell to a 12-year low in April to October period in 23-24 compared to the same period in previous year. Net FDI flow as a percentage of the GDP has been falling from 3.6% in 2008 to 1.4 in 2021 and 0.8 in 2023. So therefore, we don't see much happening, and whatever has been said in this budget is perhaps the repeat of what has been said all these years, but we haven't seen any of it really getting fructified. Of course, there is one silver lining, which is that on regulatory overhang, the finance minister has said she's going to have a look at it, and that would be very welcome, because if I just saw recently Observer Research Foundation's report, in which it said "Jailed for Doing Business" was the title. It says that the 26,134 imprisonment clauses in India's business laws. So these are the number of imprisonment clauses. Within these laws is a web of 69,233 compliances, of which 25,537 are at the central level. So we can see why private investment is not coming into the country. And we need to look at not just decriminalizing it, but also getting out of the entire web of the compliances that we have put in place at the moment. So the third is exports. Now, India's current account deficit has shown signs of narrowing, and in the July-September quarter, it stood at 1.2% of the GDP. But this is attributed primarily to rise in exports of services, etc. However, trade deficit in goods remains a concern, and with the rise in the import of gold, I think there will also be pressure on current account deficit going forward. The global geopolitical situation, including wars in Ukraine and Gaza, which has been adverse to India's export interests, has dampened India's export performance further. However, domestic factors have also played a hand in discouraging export growth. According to the World Bank, India's share in global exports of labor-intensive sectors such as apparel, leather, textiles, and footwear has declined. Meanwhile, countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, Poland, Germany, and France have increased their global export share in major job-creating sectors, set up to 22% between 2015 and 2022. So exports also, we are finding there is a difficulty, and we are not being able to get into global supply networks on account of restricted trade policies, tariff barriers, and a focus on Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliance. Once again, we do not see much that has been said on this by the government in the budget. Now, government expenditure is the one area which I think for a longest period of time was driving GDP growth. The focus on capital investment had increased exponentially. The Indian government has spent over rupees 54 lakh crore on capital expenditure in the past 11 years. Despite this massive spending, it is reported that the concerns over weak private investment and unemployment persist. So the idea was that if government is going to do massive capital investment, it will crowd in private investment, but it has not happened. And now we are seeing the slowing down in the capex also because of the fiscal deficit concerns. Last year, the government spent 1 lakh crore less than what it had targeted. And this year, the budget itself shows 10,000 crores less allocated to infrastructure than it was in the previous year. So it is also to be remembered that we are not being able to see the numbers being added up. If you see the tax buoyancy, it has, especially in direct taxes, it's showing a healthy growth. Overall tax growth is also has been shown as very healthy growth. But with all the tax breaks that are being given, we don't know how these numbers will add up. Now I will quickly come to the second part, which is equity. And this is my second part of the argument. With rising inequalities in the country, one expected the budget to confront and address this issue squarely. According to the World Inequality Report 2022, India is one of the most unequal countries in the world, with the top 10% of the population holding around 77% of the total national wealth. The wealthiest 1% of the Indian population owns 53% of country's wealth, while the poorer half contends with a mere 4.1% of national wealth. The share of the bottom 50% has gone down to 13%. Approximately 64% of the country's total GST comes from the bottom 50% of the population, while only 4% comes from the top 10%. So we can also see how poor are paying more tax than the rich are paying as far as indirect taxes are concerned. So if you look at these numbers, it's very clear that even per capita income, if you see, it also is very misleading, because the people at the bottom half are barely being able to make any incomes, and the entire per capita income is coming from the upper half of the population. So, what do we look at the allocations in the sector which we say equity? Rural development allocation has been cut. As far as health, I will not dwell too much onto it, because already we have people who have expertise in this area. But if you look at the healthcare, we have not done much of an allocation in the healthcare sector or the education sector. And despite the severity of hunger scale in India, child wasting, etc., there is not much increase in allocation in these areas. In fact, the actual expenditure also has been much less than what was budgeted for it in the last year. Finally, I will speak a little on employment, which is a great worry for India. The unemployment rate increased from 8% in November to 8.30 in December 24. The unemployment in India has been actually a matter of great worry. It averaged 8.18% from 2018 up to 2024, reaching an all-time high of 23.5 in April 2020. But of course, that was when the pandemic had started. The government response has been to push Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India initiative, and boost manufacturing sector. But as Raghuram Rajan has estimated, only 10% of the total job creation has been in the manufacturing sector, whereas agriculture and construction have contributed 54% and 17% respectively in the past 10 years. Considering India's young population, we need 1 crore job every year. India is facing a serious risk of losing out on demographic dividend on this account. Labor's contribution to growth is also falling instead of increasing. When we look at the farmers' incomes, etc., economic survey says agriculture remains remarkably resilient due to increased productivity, expansion of crop diversification, and increased farmers' income. But on each of these, there has been no great movement. And according to the data, there is no significant jump in crop productivity. Growth rates of yield between 2014-15 and 22-23 were marginally lower in food grain crops and non-food grain crops than between 2004-5 and 13-14. Second, there is no significant evidence of crop diversification in India other than marginal shifts in few states. And third, while government continues to claim a rise in farmers' income, data shows the opposite. There is either a stagnation or fall in farmers' real income in recent years. I think Avani is here. They have done a sterling analysis of how the budget support the poor and the marginalized in these times. So I will not go. I will leave it to her to speak about. But they have clearly shown that in the public sector spending has been declining in the recent years. On education and health also, there is a decline in real terms, because the increases don't even cover the inflation which the economy is seeing. So I would conclude my observations at this point. I know that I have uh, I have not spoken directly in terms of the numbers, etc. They are all there. We have seen them, but I think the point that you had made to start with, Kalyan, about the vision part of it. I think these are the key issues that should have been looked at by the budget and addressed, which I think they have not, and therefore I do not see the government being able to achieve what they have stated they want to achieve through this budget. Thank you.
Many thank you, many thanks, sir. And you have talked about Make in India, then the capex allocation, and I'm going to request Professor Chaudhary to talk on that. And then unemployment issue in the I work in the agriculture and rural development segment. Even there, the situation is grim. It's not in a very good situation. Anyway, many thank you, thanks, sir, and I'll come back to you again. Now, Professor Suresh Babu is here.
Yes.
Sir, I have two questions, and I'll request all the panelists to to complete their critical observation in next 6 to 7 minutes, so that we can go for real panel discussions. So. See, recognizing the importance of rural development, the Union Budget 2025 has focused on key areas such as employment generation, women empowerment, education, and infrastructural development in rural India. I was very happy as such, Amount allocated for the demand is only, it is, I think, 1,90,000 crore. So how do you see this? Do you think this is enough to improve the prevailing situation in rural India? What do you like to suggest going forward in terms of sectoral allocation on priority?
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity to be in a very important panel. I hope I am audible.
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay, thank you. I think one has to see this budget as Dr. Mayaram had already given us the broad perspective on which, from this whole issue of the factors that are shaping the government strategy behind this budget, or what should have been the government strategy in this budget. And I would like to single out, some of these key things which we need to keep in mind. One, this budget comes at the backdrop of a growth slowdown. And we know that, the last quarter, as we saw the numbers, it was not near our expected rate of growth. Second, it also comes at a time when the gross savings in the economy is not increasing. And that has important implications when we really look at investments and, driving the capex cycle and things of that sort. Third, the corporate earnings is not growing at a very fast pace, though we have a lot of discussion in the economic survey in terms of wage growth or the distribution and profits and wages and things of that sort. When we look at the corporate earnings, it's not actually growing at a very fast pace. Fourth important thing that we need to keep in mind is that, and that links to your question, Mr. Kalyan, that household debt is actually increasing, not at a very alarming rate when compared to some of the other, developing economies, but it is increasing, and that is a reality. Now, finally, the fifth point, I think that we already heard from Dr. Mayaram that the options for India in terms of the old mantra, like the export-led growth, etc., I don't think does not exist, at least in the next fiscal year. Now, keeping this in mind, now I come back to the question, that is the allocation in terms of rural development and other sectors, is it enough? Well, the simplest and the straightforward answer, how much ever we allocate is not enough. because that is where the whole activities are taking place at one level. Now, and I would substantiate why that is where the activities are taking place. You see, there are two important things that we need to keep in mind. One, the budget is actually banking on a demand revival, right? And we have been seeing these commentaries as well as the numbers, which again, Dr. Mayaram had pointed out that the so-called tax cuts are limited to this very small fraction. And that small fraction of taxpayers are also people perhaps who are under some kind of a financial stress. It's not a very linear, straightforward assumption to make that if you provide a tax cut, these people would spend more, and the overall demand will increase. Not sure about that. Why? Because they might also use this additional disposable income in their hands to pay off some of the debts. And in that case, the aggregate demand might not increase. So that's some kind of an uncertainty, one. Second, when we look at the rural economy, there is a kind of a phenomenon that is happening, that is agriculture is a sector that is growing when we look at the sectoral value added, right? Employment in agriculture is also increasing. So all throughout, we were thinking of a kind of a structural transformation from agriculture to industry to services or whatever it is. And we debated that India has bypassed industrialization and moved to service orientation. But I would now fear that there is a kind of a reverse structural transformation that is happening. People are actually going back to the agriculture and to rural kind of settings now. And perhaps one of the hypotheses, I don't have evidence on this, is that in the post-COVID era, when a lot of people returned back to the rural kind of areas, they never came back to the urban areas because activities in the urban areas were not enough to absorb them. So they had to stay back in the rural areas. And it is in that context we need to see these allocations for rural development and agriculture. So I have two kinds of fears which I would like to put. It is not a very kind of an optimistic thing, but first, we already are on the brink of what I would really call as a premature deindustrialization. Commentators like Danny Roderick and I have written about this. That is industrialization not picking up or slowing down even at very low levels of per capita incomes. Second, we also are facing a threat of a reverse structural transformation, that is a kind of an outflow from the urban to the rural where they are getting jobs. In this perspective, when we see the allocations, is it enough? Well, I would say, we might need more there. So what is the government's kind of an strategy here? Government strategy is two-pronged. One, continue the capex, though there is a slight shortfall, as Dr. Mayaram had pointed out, but continue it, and that will create multiplier effects, and that multiplier effects will have a percolation kind of a possibility even to the rural incomes. A. B, continue or sustain to some extent the kind of livelihood programs as well as the other relief measures that is provided to the rural people. A combination of these two is expected to revive or live the rural economy. But again, the question there is in terms of skills as well as employment. Now, we should also remember that, we are in the process of, urbanizing, and the pace of urbanization has picked up. Once when the pace of urbanization picks up even more, we actually need to have a full-fledged census to get the data on it, which we are still waiting for. We find that urban jobs need more skills. Now, are we ready in terms of our allocations on skills as well as education for having this kind of, higher levels of skills, especially in an era when we are talking about AI and, and our Prime Minister now was in Paris yesterday talking about the implications of AI and things of that sort. So skilling, I think, is an area where we might fall short given the allocations. I am not going in detail to health, education, and other social sectors, but my overall impression is that there is a kind of an optimism in terms of banking on increased demand from tax cuts, and that increased demand would revive growth. Perhaps I'll stop here, maybe come back with more comments.
So I have just another question, which is little bit interrelated. Just you can take 2 minutes. That the union budget introduces several new schemes and missions aimed at fostering development under 4 key pillars: Garib, Youth, Annadata, and Nari. These initiatives reflect a commitment to inclusive growth and empowerment. And how do you see it? That how is that going to help?
Yeah. Well, I would say the vision is quite good in terms of, and it's very comprehensive, and we find some kind of a chain of causation that could run, or a virtuous kind of a cycle that could kick off with this vision. There is no doubt about that. But the point is, in terms of agriculture, for example, we know that the kind of investments that are required in terms of agriculture, especially when we are talking about our farmers getting higher prices on their produce, I think we are falling short on that. So Annadata then has to really look elsewhere. And I'll tell you a very interesting kind of an example from Tamil Nadu, for example. Tamil Nadu's agriculture system has remained more or less stable because there is a very vibrant livestock economy. And this kind of an allied activity, which is a part of the larger agriculture ecosystem, is able to manage this farmer households. So given this kind of fragilities of agriculture that we are facing now, I'm not sure about Annadata's this thing, because we talked about doubling, tripling all this farmers' income and all by certain calendar years or financial years some years back, and we are nowhere near that. One could always say that COVID took a hit and things of that sort, but perhaps I think we are still short of having a very concrete step in terms of or a vision towards agriculture. Now, why I say this? Well, if you look at the inflation in India, still food price inflation or food inflation is still the major cause of worry. And then when we talk about inflation targeting framework, we say that, well, we should look at core inflation. Yeah. But then if RBI or the central bank themselves say that, look, we don't have adequate instruments to curb the food inflation, then we need to look at some kind of a fiscal measures to really curb food inflation. So I would say on the whole, the kind of a vision is so nice and so beautifully laid out, but perhaps we need a little more elaborate kind of commitment towards fulfilling such a vision.
Many thanks, sir. I'll come back to you.
Sure.
I'll come back to. Let me go to Professor Chattopadhyay. Sir, again, Arvind sir has talked about lesser allocation in capex. So again, I'll come back to you because you are an expert. The revised capex for FY25 has been reduced to 10.18 lakh crore. Looking at the objective to reduce overall external borrowings, this might be a good step in one way, but it may impact the infrastructure development, which may in turn impact the industrial growth. So please enlighten us on that. Is that really going to impact, or it is a good step?
Okay. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here, and I would not waste my time introducing, expressing my gratitude to VACP. Let me come to the point. First, the union budget, union budget is an embodiment of fiscal policy, but it is not the only budget. You have to look at the union budget plus all the state budgets and even the local bodies to look at what does the government do in terms of fiscal policy in making an effective intervention in the economy. Number two, let me come to CapEx. As Dr. Arvind very well explained, that the crowding in effect has not really been very, very effective. Now, when we are looking at the impact of capex on the growth of the economy and income generation and therefore distribution of income, we have to look at also the composition of government expenditure. Now, it is being argued that if you look at the capex, where it is being spent, it's mainly being spent on such sectors which are very capital intensive. So the crowding in effect has been very mute, very weak. And second, because of the capital intensive sector on which capex is being spent, the percolation effect is also very, very muted. Now, it is quite evident if you are looking at the entire macroeconomy that high informal sector and real wages have been stagnant, in fact falling, and which is an indication that neither private sector investment has picked up, already mentioned by Dr. Arvind Mayaram, and nor the real wages are rising. So the multiplier effect of capex has not been very, very effective. Now, when you are looking at what is the role of government in raising the aggregate demand in the economy, we basically have to look at the fiscal deficit, and ideally it should be primary deficit, because fiscal deficit minus interest payment is primary deficit, and interest payment is constituted to be a transfer payment with a very limited sort of multiplier effect. Now, the primary deficit is budgeted to come down to 0.8%, and fiscal deficit is budgeted to also come down to 4.4% from the 4.8% as per the revised estimate. Now, net export is negative, current account deficit is also, Dr. Mayaram has said. So there is a very limited impact that it is having. Actually, what Dr. Suresh Babu was saying, the need is huge, no matter how much you end up spending. Now, whether it would reduce the private sector, whether it would dampen or affect adversely the infrastructure growth of the economy, also you have to look at what the private sector is going to do. Private sector investment did not gain momentum, did not gather momentum. But you will see the government is also trying to bring the private sector in for the last couple of years through PPP. So they also have a role to play positively in augmenting the infrastructure facilities of the country. Right? So there is indeed a fall in capex, but you have to understand that because of the FRBM, the fiscal policy role is quite restricted. Now it has been, so the government is trying to move from the demand-driven policies to the supply-driven policies. So earlier, the tax concessions that were extended to the private sector did not fructify, did not yield the desired result. Now it has been given to the 1.75 crore income tax paying population in terms of 1 lakh crore tax benefit. Now, what impact it would have depends on the marginal propensity to consume of this tax-paying population, 1.75 crore, which is definitely less than the marginal propensity to consume of the non-tax-paying population because they are at a lower level of income. So I would like to argue that the infrastructure growth has to be borne by the state, by the private sector, because the role of the government has shrunk or has become very, very limited because of the FRBM. So the infrastructure growth has to be shouldered by all other, the private sector and the state as well. And the visions, I mean, I'm going back to the question about what is the importance of budget. I was thinking, see, the budget is a vision document, but it has to be supported by the proposed regulatory interventions as well as infusion of financial resources into the scheme. And for a country like India, I think the budget assumes important. Possibly, you know, the general people are getting very, very disappointed because years after years, many policies have been mooted, have been implemented, but the effect is not that apparent if you're looking at the growth rate, right? So somehow we feel that, you know, it's not raising my income. We are still looking for jobs. Graduate unemployment level is very high. And what is the growth rate? It's still more or less around 6% or so. It's a structural slowdown that already been mentioned, right? So I'll stop here.
Many thanks, sir. I'll come back to you. Let me go to our fellow panelist, Avani Kapoor. You're there?
Yes.
We need to understand how the budget is going to address building the human capital, reducing inequality, and ensuring long-term economic resilience. You are the right person to speak about it.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Dr. Mayaram, for your kind words, and VSEP for inviting me. I think we've all started a little bit with setting context. And I think for me as well, when I was even before the budget came out, I was thinking about what the budget would hold. My passion is the social sector. And just looking at the numbers, I wasn't very hopeful. Everyone's talked about the GDP growth rate decline. So I won't start with that. But if one thinks about the fact that the union budget in some ways has been shrinking, Professor Chattopadhyay spoke about the fact that yes, one needs to look at it collectively, states and the center, but just the significant decline in the size of the union budget. If you look at the numbers, total government expenditure of the union government as a ratio of the GDP has been falling from 16% in 21-22 down to 14% this year anticipated. And this is, yes, with the COVID-19, there was a big push in union government expenditure. And so some decline is natural. But we're now less than 1 percentage point more than the pre-pandemic level. So you have a shrinking union budget. At the same time, you have rising committed liabilities, which have gone up to 32%, just the interest payments. And with the 8th pay commission announced, that's going to significantly increase the committed liabilities as well. At the same time, the revenue receipts aren't really growing as fast. So this year, for instance, they've anticipated an 11% growth in revenue receipts. But if you compare that with the average annual growth rate from 1920 to 24-25, which was 14%, it's still lower. So given all of this, I didn't have too much hope for the social sector. I think this government's strategy with respect to the social sector has been this big push in capital expenditure. There has been a lot more focus on the drinking water scheme, Jal Jeevan Mission, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, all of which tend to be infrastructure-driven schemes. And it goes with the government's narrative that one way to increase demand and the whole multiplier effect of capital spending is we will now push a lot more investments in capital expenditure. But here again, I think the trends have been not great in terms of signaling. For the past many years, and this is not something new, I think except for 22-23, for the past 5 years, the actual capital expenditure has remained much lower than even the revised estimates, forget the budget estimates. And if you see the trends for this year, out of the 11.11 lakh crores that was estimated, only 64% was spent till December. In fact, between November and December, you saw a big push because it was only 46% till November. And you see this playing out in a lot of the infrastructure schemes as well, with respect to the social sector. So the Jal Jeevan Mission, for example, you saw a slowdown. The revised estimates were significantly muted in that. Similarly, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, again, a 23% reduction. So if you think about it, if your push in the social sector is that we're going to be focusing a lot on infrastructure-driven delivery, which is caked in the language of entitlements, we aren't really being able to push the narrative as much because there's been a significant slowdown in that. And that's led to a lot of the targets being extended as well. 2024 was meant to be the end of many of these schemes, but you're seeing them being extended by another 5 years, partly because we've not been able to meet our targets. So that's a little bit of background. With respect to human development, as you said, and I see there's a question in the chat as well on social development, SDGs, social development goals. I think that it comes back to what are we focusing on, and that doesn't seem to be the typical social sector that we have envisaged in the past. If you think about it, a lot, as Dr. Mayaram as well said, in real terms, social sector expenditure has been falling. And as a proportion of the total expenditure of the government, this year, only 70% was spent on social sector. And this is including everything, including the big push in capital expenditure, which is clearly a priority of the government. So with respect to, so while the budget spoke about investing in people, we all know that the largest employers in some ways of people is the social sector. But yet we aren't really spending on the social sector. And even the government, this government's vision of the social sector, which focuses less on human development indicators like health and education and nutrition, and much more on infrastructure-led delivery, even that doesn't seem to be playing out as expected, because even the infrastructure-based schemes aren't really being able to keep up. The pace of spending isn't keeping up with the requirements on the ground. And you see that this year. There seems to be this typical cut. So I also take all the budget announcements with a pinch of salt, even the budget estimates, because the last couple of years we've seen a significant downward revision in the revised estimates. So even the promises that have been made, we haven't been able to keep pace with them. I'll pause here so that there's more room for discussion.
No, many thanks. Better not to be pessimist. So I'll go to Ambika madam. Ambika Natarajan madam is there. Ambika might be just Dev Dulal. Can you hear? Something, I think.
Ambika is having some internet issues, so you can continue. In the meantime, she will join and you can get back to her. I'll intimate you once she joins.
Yeah, sure. Let me know. Now, Sir Arvind sir, I'll come back to you. Yes, because Professor Chattopadhyay is thinking in a different way for the reduction in capex allocation, and he has his own logic. PPP, it can be done on PPP basis, and the union government may not be sole responsible for that. So any comments from your side?
Actually, in this year's budget, government has said that they will bring in PPPs in a big way. There are two basic problems when we look at public-private partnerships. One is that much of the consumer in terms of public infrastructure is the government itself. And therefore, we have seen there have been huge issues in the past about payments to the private party. The dispute resolution has not happened. At one point of time, close to 40,000 crores was pending for payment. I'm talking about 10 years ago, pending for payment to the NHAI on account of the public-private partnership contracts, which were not honored by the NHAI. So you have this whole overhang and there is no resolution to it. Our courts also are very slow, civil courts are slow, and then private parties don't want to get into this conflict situation with the government. So there is a problem there. But the second and also a very big important problem is private finance. So where do people, private sector get finance from? Cost of finance is very high in the country at the moment because of very high deficits which the government runs. Inflation is high, so the cost of finance is high. And the second thing is that the private sector companies are also over leveraged. So I don't think they have the capacity to borrow and invest in infrastructure, public infrastructure projects of long-term nature. From the market, they don't have that capacity to borrow that much, and we have seen this. If you see the number of companies which have, and the banks which have taken haircut on account of this NCLT processes, it is quite scary in fact, because close to 15 lakh crores have been in some way written off from the books of the private sector projects. So I think there is this again is one of those very good intentions where government knows, and I hope they know, because it is supposed to be known to policymakers that this path is not an easy path to tread, and obviously it is not going to be in the short run. I mean, in the long run, you can create new frameworks, you can create new contract documents, you can create new structures and so on. But it's not happening in this coming year, which they say in the budget that they will go in for it. It's not happening in this year. It's not even happening next year. So I don't think, whereas what Dr. Chattopadhyay is saying about a long-term thing, I'm very sure private sector must come in as a partner. But also we must remember that public-private partnerships will constitute only 10 to 15% of the total infrastructure requirements, because they come in only where the infrastructure is commercially viable. Rural roads, for instance, cannot be done by private sector. Rural water supply schemes cannot be done by the private sector. Rural irrigation schemes cannot be done by the private sector. They are not commercially viable. So they can't even be made commercially viable through VGF kind of schemes, because the payment is just not there. I mean, we have seen in case of rural grids, for instance, or grids, electricity grids, we have seen. The entire, the pricing is so, distorted that there is no private market in that field. So I don't think it is going to happen. The public-private partnerships are really going to be the answer. I mean, they're not going to construct primary schools, primary health centers, tertiary hospitals in the rural areas. They will have to be done by the government. And for that, government will have to prioritize where they want to spend. Actually, should they be spending at the moment on very large ticket infrastructure projects, like expressways, for instance, or they should temper it down a bit and divert some of that money to the kind of infrastructure and services which will produce, as Avni has said, the social sector produces the largest number of jobs. Where will jobs come from now? In manufacturing, it is robots which are coming in, or artificial intelligence is coming into it. So the jobs have to come at that level. In medical and health, in education, in nutrition, and so
on. Thank you, sir. Let me come back to Professor Chattopadhyay. Sir, the increased disposable income due to tax relief would definitely, benefit both affordable and mid-income housing segments, and FMCG, electronics, mobile phone industry would grow. No, I strongly believe in that. At the same time, the budget has given relaxation in duty in number of items. So I have a question. Do you think now, and the duty exemption is given in the components, not in the finished product. So do you think it's going to somehow is going to support the Make in India initiative, or is going to just increase the trade deficit? Professor Chattopadhyay.
Yeah, thank you. A very interesting question. Before I come to this question, I would like to join the conversation with Dr. Mayaram. I'm in agreement with him. You see, in those sectors where the possibility of cost recovery is very limited, like social sector, and cost recovery entails that the burden is imposed on the intended beneficiaries, why should the private sector be interested? They are interested in making profit. So if the profit-making scope is very limited, why should we expect them to invest? In certain sectors like space, last year budget did announce something, venture capital and all, energy. These are some of the sectors where the scope for making profit is somewhat better than what would happen in case of social sector. It can happen. But in social sector, various models are there. In education in particular, I can tell you, but it's not working out that way. Because ultimately, why should they invest if they can't maximize their profit, right? So, I mean, that is the private, even if we make situation for them. Now, let me come to your question. Yes, Atmanirbharata is a major overarching philosophy within which we have to understand the budget making. It's at the three level: national, institutional, and the individual level. Now, the duty exemption that you're saying, I don't think it would have a very strong impact. But for, say, the electronic gadgets, like the laptop and desktop, our government did say something last year and the year before, that how we can reduce our import from abroad. And so therefore, we had to seek permission from the government before importing the laptop and the desktops. So there have been some progress there. There have been some progress there, how to reduce our import dependence over a period of time. And these steps are quite desirable steps, and this much needed, because that would reduce the import intensity of the government and move towards. Now, this Make in India thing is not restricted to laptop and desktop and electronic gadgets. It's also the government asking us to spend as a tourist on locally produced goods and services, right? So, so overall thrust is good, but merely by giving duty exemption and all, it would be tinkering. It would not have a very substantial impact on the Make in India. What we need is some structural transformation through fabrication or through designing of new duty structure, new incentive structure within a regulatory framework, and how to facilitate the investment in those sectors. I mean, get out of the way what was mentioned in the economic survey. Then we'll be moving towards that. But there have been some attempt, and I believe it's a good attempt that, even Apple has also started functioning in our country. And these are some of the good attempts that the signal is being given that we can move towards that. Yeah, thank you.
Many thanks, sir. I'll come to Professor Suresh Babu. Sir, you told, like that people are going back to agriculture. So as at that time, I didn't make any comments, thing is that, like at the time of COVID, people did go back to agriculture. And finally, what happened is, because I work in the field, my job is not in Delhi. I need to go to field very, frequently. Situation is something different. People, started getting that anaj, we call anaj, that free, free ration, 5 kilo, I think, per month. And 80 crore people are getting that. That's number one. And secondly, all the state governments are giving freebies. So, like the migrant laborers, or, like the farming labor, they went back to the state. They are not ready to come back to Punjab or Western UP or Haryana or Maharashtra. So there's acute crisis of farming labor. So, somehow I have seen in several government reports that, people are inclined or people are interested to go back. It's not true. Secondly, agriculture is not remunerative. It's really not remunerative. Government took initiative for doubling farming income, but it did not work for different reasons, let us not discuss here. So I thought that I'll just, if you have some other thought in that direction that will enlighten me, you can definitely let me know.
Yeah. So, my observation is based on the latest PLFS data, which actually, shows that the bulk of employment growth is happening in the sector where, we generally think that people are moving out. What is the reason for it, and what is causing this kind of an anomaly to a kind of a mainstream thinking is something which we need to be investigated. And I would say that I would go back to the observations that have been made earlier, that India at the moment is facing a huge shortfall in terms of investments in urban infrastructure. Yeah. Just to roll out some numbers here, I was looking at this most recent World Bank report, and it states that India would need around 840 billion dollars between 2022 and 2037. That was the estimate in terms of urban infrastructure requirement, which roughly comes to around $55 billion every year, consistently year after year after year. And here we find that in this kind of a scenario, what is coming from the private financing is just 5%. The rest, government has to do the heavy lifting. Now, That capex cycle, yes, it is being on and off kind of a thing now. And last year there was a kind of a shortfall because of various reasons, maybe the state elections or maybe other kind of factors. But what we find is that the moment that capex is dipping, jobs in the urban space is also dipping. Then the migrant workers don't have any other fallback option but to go back to the rural areas. Now, there is also a kind of a problem which requires, I would say, a very thorough kind of a research at the moment. Yesterday we see the statement by the L&T chief that a lot of freebies as well as free rations are creating a problem in the urban labor market because people are reluctant to move out of the rural land. So there is a shortage, and we find that shortage of workers are hindering the progress of urban infra projects also. So I think there is some kind of a disruption that has happened in this whole urban labor market, which perhaps has to be corrected in terms of continuously sustaining income growth in the urban areas.
Let me interject a bit here. See, I think what we have to remember is that there is no growth in wages, even in the urban areas. And inflation is pretty high. Price rise is pretty high. I mean, and therefore it is no longer viable for people to move from rural areas to urban areas to work. It is not as if jobs are growing in the rural areas. It is simply that people are getting absorbed in whatever little they can do, but because they are closer to home, they don't have much expenditure on that count, and therefore they are able to sustain themselves. It is not something that they are doing voluntarily, and I think this is a hoax which was also spoken of when the MG and Narega was introduced, that there is no labor available because people have gone lazy and they're sitting at home. I think it is with the kind of food grain which is given, I don't think anybody can sustain a whole family for the whole year just by getting whatever we call the so-called freebies from the government. It's just not possible. It is, if you compute it, it doesn't come to that much. I mean, for government, it may be a large bill because the country has a huge population, but for individual, it does not translate into too much of a financial support. So I think I think even the L&T chairman, I think, is also wrong in his estimation, as it was in the past with regard to MG Narega, that people are staying back home out of laziness or out of freebies. It is simply because L&T and the likes are not willing to give higher wages to the people who come to work in the cities, and therefore people are not willing to come because they cannot sustain themselves. Generally, families moved from rural to urban areas while leaving some to work on those very small and micro farms that they had. One set of family members would move to the city to augment that income. But if they are going to consume everything they earn in the city only on their own livelihood, upkeep, why should they come to the cities? I mean, then this much they are able to do in their back home itself. So I think there is a problem in this whole analysis, and this narrative which is set, I think also is a narrative where the government policymakers try thinking that this is the reality. Actually, what is real is that wages are not growing, and we have seen evidence of this. And because of that, it is time that we debunk these kind of theories, which all these corporates are now spouting. I don't think it really works that way.
So, Devdulal, this Ambika has come back, or she could not join?
No, she joined, but she left because there is a issue of connectivity in our HCL office. They might not be allowing Google Meet to, they have Microsoft, something like that. So she just messaged me, and that's sad on our part, but please continue.
So no issues, let us open the forum to the, the participants, I can see there are 49 people are there. So did you receive any question from them?
Yeah, I did receive one question from Dr. C. Muthuraja. So he he's asking, how do we assess the budget in terms of achieving SDGs and Viksit Bharat @ 2047? So anyone of the panelists may take the
I think
question.
Suresh sir is the right person.
Avni has also done some work on this, no?
Yeah, I would just have a very brief comment, and perhaps Avni can elaborate more on that. Well, I think it's a long journey, 2047, and I don't think budget can do much at this point towards that. Budget can give a broad direction, and as Professor Somin was talking earlier, we have to see budget in terms of totality. So I don't see that budget can give a kind of a push towards 2047 in a year or whatever it is. It can lay out some of these things, and in laying out that vision, perhaps there are the right kind of signals that we get, Annadada or Nari and things of that sort. But how do we really accomplish that? I think that is a challenge. And over to you, Amni.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think only thing I would say is that from the social sector's perspective, and that's a big part of equity, the equity angle, but also SDGs, I think 2025 marked a significant milestone. It was the 20th anniversary of some of our big flagship programs, the National Health Mission, which is one of the big ones that improved healthcare access significantly to a large degree. Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan started in 2005. Now it's subsumed under Samagra Shiksha. The NREGA also, the act started around that time. And these programs have done a lot to universalize primary education, improve healthcare access. NREGA has been an important social security net, and I think COVID-19 showed us that as much as we're not being able to spend enough, when push came to shove and the pandemic hit, it was a big life savior for many people. And that's where I'm a bit confused about how we're going to achieve Viksit Bharat if we're not able to take every single person in, along with us in terms of improving human development indicators. I spoke about the fact that social sector expenditure this year, 24-25, was the lowest in a decade as a share of total expenditure. But it's not just a one figure. I think over a period of time, if you see, average annual growth rate of social sector expenditure was 8% in the 14-15 to 19-20 period. It's fallen to 4% in 19-20 to 24-25. And this is particularly striking for some of these indicators like medical, public health and family welfare. Despite the pandemic, the growth rate declined from 16% in the previous period to 5%. Others, which includes welfare schemes for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, there's so much discussion and debate right now on the caste census. Again, saw a big decline in terms of growth rate from 11% to 3%. As Dr. Mayaram said, we've been analyzing real allocations and 9 schemes. And again, if you look at the period in the last 5 years, 19-20 to 24-25, with the exception of Jal Jeevan Mission, all schemes saw a decline in real allocations. And some of the biggest declines were the schemes that we've all known for 25 years, Samagra Shiksha, the midday meal scheme, the National Health Mission, NREGA, the social security scheme, which is the National Social Assistance Program. After so many years, you're still giving 200 rupees as pension to people from the union government. So while you can argue that many of these sectors are the state's responsibilities because many of them are in the state wrist, at the same time, I think if as a country as a whole, the union government also has an important role to play in ensuring equity. And that was the whole reason for creating centrally sponsored schemes, that minimum standards of delivery should exist across the country. It shouldn't matter whether you're born in Bihar or Kerala or Meghalaya. You should have at least some minimum standards of delivery. And I think that's where there is a need, and I hope it comes soon, of how are you going to achieve this? How are you going to achieve Viksit Bharat, where we're not being able to raise allocations, but equally important, you're not really being able to ensure efficient utilization. So I'm hoping that in the next few years, we will hear more. Yesterday, there was a lot of discussion in the finance minister's speech on unspent balances lying with states. So I don't say that it's only the union government's responsibility, it's also the state's responsibility, but I'm hoping for a clear direction on on the social sector being a big part of the Viksit Bharat vision.
Many thanks. If there's no other question, then
No, I would
There is
just
one
like to very
question.
briefly.
Yes, sir, please.
Sorry, if I'm permitted, very
Yes,
briefly,
yes.
very briefly. You see, as Ms. Kapoor was saying, in a conceptualization of Viksit Bharat, I would also like to see the role of higher education here. What the government is trying to do and what the government will end up achieving, these are two different things. What the government is trying to do, you see, if the objective is to attain inclusive growth, what is important is the major challenge that there's a mismatch in the demand for labor and supply of skill, demand for skill and supply of skill, and second is the graduate unemployment and underemployment. Now, what is therefore being envisioned in the National Education Policy and National Credit Framework is to give massive emphasis to the reorientation of the education system as a whole by focusing on or giving thrust on the skill sector. What it will end up doing, it's a different matter, because the demand for skill, because of the rapid introduction of AI and all, is changing the skill composition. So what the government is trying to do is to make the institutions and as well as the student respond to this. Now, I'm a bit, this is the vision of the government. The Viksit Bharat cannot be without the education, school as well as higher education. So there's a bit of repurposing of education, like skill, and then we connect more to the industry. The budget has allotted for R&D to be undertaken by the private sector. But my worry is the foundation at the school and the college and the university level, foundation, the basic maintenance of infrastructure and revamping the sector as a whole needs more money, and that not forthcoming from the union budget. So the Viksit Bharat needs, as I'm repeating, social sector investment, and that is not coming because there is a bit of a shortfall in what we desire or what we expect.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to everyone. And even I have learned a lot, especially from Dr. Arvind Saab, Professor Chattopadhyay, Suresh Babu, and definitely our young panelist, Avani. So many thanks to everyone. Now I'll go to Dev Dulal.
Thank you, Dr. Swami. Thanks, Dr. Mayaram. So I would request thanks to all the panelists, Professor Suresh Babu, Professor Chattopadhyay, Avani. Ambika could not join. Dr. Manish Gupta from NIPFP had a last minute meeting, so he had to, he could not join this, but I'm sure in future they'll be joining us. I'd be requesting our student, Ms. Faith Enos, to share the vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Faith. I'm a first-year student at BSEP doing BSc Economics. So first of all, I want to thank Dr. Thakur for organizing this wonderful meeting for all of us and the opportunity to address and to discuss with all these esteemed faculties and personnel. And I extend my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Mayaram for his thought-provoking analysis of the union budget. It was deeply enlightening and insightful. And then my gratitude to Professor Chattopadhyay and Professor Suresh Babu for their insight into the macro and micro levels of expenditure and problems in the rural communities and consumption. Finally, my thanks to Ms. Kapoor for her insight on the problems and declines of social expenditure over the years. And also, I want to acknowledge the commendable role of Dr. Goswami for organizing and skillfully moderating this session. Finally, I want to express my gratitude to all the faculty members, all the students, and all the participants who have attended and made this session a lively one. Good evening and have a nice evening. Thank you. all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye bye.
Namaskar, namaskar.